those chatbots have suggested harm, have said things like, meet me on the other side, as in when you're gone.
Welcome to ChatRog, the podcast in ethics in artificial intelligence. I'm Roger Steare, the corporate philosopher. Today, we're joined by Steele, founder and director of the Safe AI for Children Alliance, a global initiative working to reduce AI risks for young people and to make sure technology is built with care, caution, and wisdom. From AI companions and deepfakes to age assurance and platform design, Tara is at the front line of turning principles into guardrails that effectively protect children. Tara, welcome to ChatRog.
Hi, Roger. Thank you very much for having me today. Looking forward to talking.
So let's dive straight in. What problem did you see that led you to found the Safe Alliance?
I've had an interest in AI safety broadly for quite a long time. But last year, 2024, in August, I started doing an AI governance course for 3 months. It was a really excellent course to learn about governance, regulations, some of the issues around AI. And at the end of that, we were all sort of tasked with doing a project, like an essay, or some people made a game, or any kind of thing to try to add to that whole topic. And it had come to my attention throughout that time that there had been little, if any, talk about specifically how these issues affect children. And I thought that's not okay. So for my project, I came up with like a framework for an organization that could make a difference to children and help to protect their interests when it comes to the risks from AI and creating a all-around better AI future for them. So I came up with that sort of blueprint. And then when we finished the course, I sort of felt like I had a responsibility to take that further. So we actually created this thing that I'd designed. And that was about a year ago that I officially did that. And it's been a year and it's gone really, really well. The support has been amazing. And I'm happy to say that in that year, I think the awareness of risks to children has increased dramatically and the interest in them. That's great. And I like to think that we've had an impact in that. What I would also say, though, unfortunately, is that some of the reason that that awareness has increased so much is because we have now seen the harms. So it's no longer just a case of saying this could happen, we need to protect against this. Unfortunately, now it's a case of saying, look, this has happened. We really need to move on keeping children safe.
Cute. So let's look at AI companions straight away. Why are experts like you so worried about them for under 18s? Where's the evidence pointing?
Well, that's really what I'm talking about most of all when I say that we've seen those harms now. There have been children who have died from suicide. There are legal cases going through at the moment. And it would certainly seem to be the case that those tragic deaths have come following a huge influence by extended interactions with AI companions or even AI chatbots like ChatGPT. They are designed in such a way that they seem very human. And even as adults, even though we know they're not human, of course we know that, our feelings can be very different. And especially for younger people, they can really, very understandably, be pulled into this feeling of being in a real relationship. And because they feel like that, the real relationship has a huge influence on them. So the suggestions from the other side of that relationship, that parasocial relationship, really affects them. Those chatbots have suggested harm, have said things like, meet me on the other side, as in when you're gone, and suggested keeping things from parents when children and young people have said, I need help, I want to share this. So when we look at the sort of transcripts of those conversations, it's really just extremely clear that the chatbot or the AI companion has acted in a very harmful way to children. Now, those children in those tragic cases, have been quite early adopters of this technology. There is no reason to think that this won't happen more unless we make a change. So that is one of the most critical areas that we need to focus on right now for AI safety for children.
And how was this ever allowed to happen? Did the software companies, the AI designers, the coders, all of it, why did they not test this? Why did they, or don't they care, or didn't they care?
Well, I suppose that's a couple of different questions within that. I mean, it's very clear that that's a risk. Um, I mean, if someone like me can foresee that, who has no experience in technology or AI, from a technical point of view, then there are some super clever people on those teams. Then, of course, you should be able to foresee that that's going to happen when you make this AI companion or chatbot seem like a human. It's kind of obvious. So it was foreseeable. There are no meaningful regulations to foresee that harm and then not be able to release it anyway. Now, why they would do that, I would have to speculate. Could be purely profit driven. Could be that it's a risk worth taking in order to put that product out. I'm not sure. I have spoken to people from like the Silicon Valley community. Some of them have been of that mind that yes, they did know, but I don't know for sure. But certainly, I feel confident in saying it was irresponsible.
Sure.
Also,
And it,
it's still going
sorry,
on. Like we know the harms now, and yet the pros are still out there.
yeah, indeed. So let's talk about something that you mentioned on your website, deepfakes and nudify apps. What's new here? What's concerning you? And what can you and we actually do to stop the harm at scale?
So, nudifying apps, just for anyone who doesn't know, are apps that are widely available, can be easily downloaded from an app store, that digitally remove clothing in photos to create very convincing, lifelike images of the person with no clothes on. So, when it's a child, what someone is doing there, if they go through that process, is creating CSAM, child sexual abuse material. So that app should not, unquestionably, should not be there if you're able to do that with it. So that's a big risk at the moment. That technology is there. You can use it for that purpose. I'd also argue you shouldn't be able to do that with adults, but children are my concern in it.
Sure.
And then deep fakes, more generally, you have those sort of issues with technology that's capable of creating deepfakes as well. That's a huge challenge, a huge concern, a huge issue for law enforcement in terms of the kinds of things that are coming out, and the volume of material that they have to deal with. And then deepfakes more generally, huge issue for society, for children to be able to understand what's real, what isn't, issues for democracy going forward, radicalization, tons of issues around this.
A third one, as well as deepfakes and nudify apps, grief bots for young people. What for you are the ethical red lines and safeguards for this? What should those safeguards be?
So grief bots, are AI companions, like we've talked about already. So AI chatbots that are sort of packaged to appear like a person and to create that kind of parasocial relationship. But when it comes to a grief bot, that chatbot is modeled around a person who has passed away. So a loved one, for example. There have already been cases that we know of where those have been given to children who are grieving for, say, a grandparent, could also be used for a parent, any loved one who's passed away. So they now have this digital companion that talks to them in the same way that that person would have done, sometimes with an avatar, even looks like a very lifelike representation of them, because how they're created is you just feed that into the training data. So photos, videos, transcripts, social media posts. So it can create a very convincing version of that person. Now, There are lots of issues with that in general. Lots of people would think that's right or that's wrong, and those are issues that we should be discussing. When it comes to children and like the kind of red lines you talked about, you should not give a child a product like that. You should not be able to market a product like that to children when it hasn't been through any kind of meaningful process within the design. So these things have not had child developmental psychologists involved, safeguarding specialists involved, people who really understand grief involved in designing them. That's the basic problem. You can't play about with a child's grief and just give them this thing. From the point of view of the adult giving it to them, I'm sure it would be extremely well intentioned, especially if that adult is in a grief as well. You just want to do whatever you can to make that situation feel better. I get that. From the developer's point of view, though, you shouldn't be putting that out there when you don't know anything about it. For a child, it just creates a ton of issues. We don't know what it does to their grieving process, because especially a young child really, really has trouble understanding that someone has gone forever. Any adult who's been through that understands that to some extent, but with a child, they sometimes literally don't understand that as a young child. What happens with your grieving process? We don't know. What happens when the app is taken away? We don't know. Do you go through grief again then in a different way? We just don't know. And my view, I think most people's view, would be that you shouldn't be playing around with children's grief in that way when they've lost a loved one. So there are a lot of issues with grief bots. Another one, sort of as an aside, is that when that technology is there, as with most things with AI, you can use it for different things. So the main issue for me is how it affects children and grieving. But you can also model that on a person who is still alive. And there are ethical issues around that. Like if you're talking to someone who you want to be involved with on an app and they don't consent to that, lots of issues.
Thank you. So you've mentioned that there are changes taking place. So some platforms are already shifting their policies. For example, character AI's under 18 ban. Is this meaningful protection or PR? And what, in your opinion, would look like going forward? What should these platforms be doing to protect children?
So if we talk about AI companion apps specifically, like character AI, I completely agree that they should not be used by anyone under 18. The risks are too great. So I totally support an organisation like Character AI taking those measures as a whole. Now, what those measures are that they're implementing, they certainly look to be much more meaningful than the current state of affairs where you just put your date of birth in, which is essentially a tick box mechanism. So they are most certainly more meaningful than that. And I think the fact that they've done that is a really good thing. Now, that has come after serious harm has been done. That is true. And that situation is unimaginably tragic. If we look at just the fact that they're putting mechanisms in place, that is a good thing. And I hope that other companies follow suit on that.
One of which I think you've mentioned elsewhere is safety tooling like Roblox's Sentinel. Is this a useful model for the industry? Are there limits to its capability?
I'm not an expert on the technology behind it. I suppose what I would just say in general is if there are new innovative ways of putting age restrictions in place, certainly broadly supportive of doing that. There are issues that need to be ironed out, like privacy risks, and those need to be addressed and discussed by the people who are specialists in that area. But broadly speaking, let's look at different ways of restricting access to children on tools that aren't suitable for them.
So as we've been discussing all of this, I'm thinking about accountability and where it should sit when, well, hopefully before harm occurs, but certainly when harm occurs. So we've got developers, deployers, a lot of these apps you can download on your Android or iPhone. Is it regulators? What about parents? I mean, there are multiple accountabilities here. So what's your view on where this should sit?
It's a really complex question, and In the ways that we've so far regulated and had sort of legislation in place with these things is a very it's responding to harm, and working out who was responsible. And that needs to be done, and it's complex here. But I believe what needs to be done more than that is to have meaningful standards in place before products go out. So I think that that needs to be addressed at the foundation model level. So talking ChatGPT, Claude, etc. Then at the application level, so there need to be meaningful regulations on whether companies can release a model that has these kind of manipulative patterns involved to keep them engaged. There need to also be the sort of monitoring things in place. So things like the Online Safety Act that are then reactive. And we need to be able to have good parental controls and age limits, like we've mentioned. So all of those things, you can have responsibility at all of those levels, and that's a complex issue. But what I would say is really, really, really important is that we have meaningful standards and regulations in place at each of those levels, that the technologists behind this have to comply to before a product is released, just like you have to do with aviation and all the different levels involved in creating aircraft and being allowed to fly it, or in pharmaceuticals, you have different
Yeah.
accountabilities at different levels. Those kind of models can be applied here.
Yeah. Another guest has talked about the pharmaceutical industry model where you actually have clinical trials, or the equivalent of them. But instead of, scientists who are looking at the physical impact of drugs on bodies, we've got psychologists and psychiatrists looking at the impact of this software on children's minds.
Yeah,
Would
absolutely.
you advocate for that?
Yes, definitely. And there are all sorts of things that you could do in that respect once these experts are involved. And it's really, really important that they are. This isn't just an area for people who understand the technology. It's an area that needs to encompass all these different types of specialities if we're going to do it well. So, in that kind of example, you could have like a grading type system where they look at the parasocial relationship, they look at the engagement metrics and come up with sort of a score as to whether this model can be released or not. Psychologists absolutely need to be involved in doing that, and some kind of like a trial process similar to clinical trials, but obviously not testing it on children, but the people who
Sure.
understand that.
Indeed, indeed. Of course, one of the biggest issues we have, and governments and regulators are finding this with everything on the web, is that national boundaries are very difficult to enforce. So the UK government may come up with something, but unless they're going to restrict people in the UK accessing sites in the US, it's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah. Also a huge challenge. This is just like every single aspect of it is a huge challenge. It's all quite new to um what I would say in that respect, in terms of like national boundaries, international boundaries, absolutely have to regulate and put standards in place nationally. We do need to do that. But I would suggest going forward that we also need some sort of a global coordination on this in terms of regulation. Now, we already do that in some ways, like Interpol, especially when it comes to harms to children. I believe we can do it. And I believe something like that is necessary because, like you say, AI doesn't stop at a border.
Quite. So we mentioned accountabilities and we mentioned parents, but of course schools have a critical role to play here. What are your recommendations here in terms of staff training, student literacy, education, policies, communications with parents who themselves need educating? What are
Yeah.
you looking for there?
So I have a huge amount of sympathy for schools, school leaders, teachers at the moment. They are already so up against it and have so much on their hands, um, in terms of education, but also in terms of safeguarding and children's welfare. And then this massive thing of AI safeguarding just comes along and they have to deal with it. So I have a huge amount of sympathy. What we want to do at the Safe AI for Children Alliance is help them with that. So we're writing materials for schools that they can disseminate out further, and just trying to help them to the best of our abilities. But I do think that safeguarding education to children at an age appropriate level and to parents really, really is necessary. So I feel bad that they have to do it, but I do think that there is a huge responsibility there to do that. Children do need safeguarding at the schools level, and they have like an unparalleled reach to do that.
And do you think there is more scope for head teachers and their colleagues and parents to be more coordinated on this and to learn together with the children?
Yes, I think sort of broadly speaking, it's always a good idea to collaborate on these kinds of challenges. So, like, I've spoken to educators who are sort of leading the way in this. They've just sort of, certain individuals just sort of found a natural affinity to wanting to lead in this area and understand the technology better. Every single person I've spoken to who is doing that has been very, very keen to share that knowledge, and sort of said, please give our name to other people you're talking to about this. So yes, collaboration is necessary. And I've also sort of spoken to national bodies who are doing this, who are also very, very keen to just get the information out to as many educators as possible. Everyone needs to pull together on this. And I think there's a real spirit to want to do that, because everyone in education wants to protect children. That's why they're there, really.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So, staying with government, you've taken these concerns to the UK Parliament. What resonated with lawmakers and what didn't? What did you find easy for them to grasp, and what was difficult in your experience?
So there are a couple of different things there. When I spoke to some legislators and lawmakers in Parliament, that was like February last year. And that was on a more general level in terms of AI risks. It was more a bit like we were earlier along in the process in that, and it was more a case of saying, please listen, there are huge risks here. Are you addressing them? And the answer at that point was sort of maybe not. It wasn't taken as seriously. So that was in quite a generalised respect. When I'm talking to MPs and political representatives from outside of the UK now, there is an appetite to do something. It's like I said with educators, that they have so much on their plate. Sort of I come to them and it's like AI, children need protecting from AI. And they're trying to deal with 100 different things at the same time. So that's one challenge for them. It's just, well, the challenge for me is to try and relay just how important this is and how serious the risks are. But I think once that point is communicated, legislators, MPs, policymakers really do have an appetite now for getting things in place to protect children. I think this requires a different type of thinking than we've ever seen before in terms of things like regulation and policy. This technology is different to anything that's come before it. So that's something that we need to, like a stumbling block to overcome, just a new type of thinking in approaching it. But yeah, everyone's more than happy to talk about it now and to have these conversations. And that wasn't really the case a year ago. So there is but we need that progress to move along much more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And as you're talking, I'm wondering, members of parliament tend to get quite energized and passionate when a child in their constituency is harmed or, God forbid, takes their life.
Yeah.
Are you monitoring, where these harms are taking place and really getting individual MPs to act on that?
One of the things that we're really calling for at the moment, we've launched a campaign called the Non-Negotiables campaign, whereby we said there are 3 principles that are non-negotiable that AI should uphold. I'll tell you what those are. But what I
Please.
would say in terms of the MPs is we're asking constituents to write to their MPs or their political representatives when it's not in the UK, and express their concerns about the risks to children, including if they're aware, if they have any personal experiences of that. So sort of even when I don't know about it, if they can communicate that story to their political representatives are then going to naturally have more of a concern about that. The three non-negotiables that I mentioned are that AI should never be available to produce sexualized images of children. It should never be designed to manipulate children emotionally, and it should never be able to encourage children to harm themselves. We've seen all those three things, and we shouldn't be.
I'm thinking of the second one. That's incredibly hard to police, isn't it? The emotional manipulation.
It is, and it's a challenge for us in how to put that across as well. Where I'm at the moment is that we do know about manipulative design features, which you could also call features to maximize engagement. We do know what those design features are, and I think those should be controlled. So you shouldn't be able to release a product where there's a very clear intention to keep the child on there for as long as possible, for example. But measuring like emotional manipulation, like how that manifests, is a challenge. I have had people coming to me though with ideas for doing that. Again, it goes back to what we were saying about people who really, really understand this, psychologists, loads more people who actually understand children and their emotions really well. They need to be involved in developing these standards.
If you could hard code one value or safeguard or non-negotiable red line into every child-facing AI, if you had to choose one, what would it be, and how could we test that it's there?
I don't know if I could choose one.
Maybe rank them. So what's the most important, do you think?
I really don't know if I could choose one because they can all be harmful in different ways. I wouldn't want to prioritize one type of harm.
Would access be, so for example, schools are banning children using smartphones in school. Parents have a choice to not allow their children to have smartphones. You know, there are phones around which are dumb phones, which are there for calls and texts and, you know, simple games, but they just don't have access to it. Is that a route, do you think?
Yes, I see what you mean. I was trying to think of what number one harm.
Yes, sorry.
So no, my misinterpretation there. It would be access, and it would be specifically access by under 18s to AI companions at the moment. I think that's the most immediate thing that we need to address in that kind of way.
Thank you. Thank you. And so there's a shared accountability then, parents, app developers, app stores, and so on. That could be relatively straightforward to encourage and to police, couldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said already, there are a lot of things that are huge challenges here. That one particular thing isn't really a huge challenge if we all come together to make it work. Though those mechanisms are most certainly in play, easy to implement, easy to put in place if there's the motivation to do that.
So I'm thinking of our listeners, and many of them will be, excuse me, motivated and passionate to do something about this. Most of them will be parents or grandparents. What are the things they can do today, having listened to this, in order to improve the safety of their children or grandchildren, do you think?
So, at a very zoomed out level, the campaign that I mentioned, if people can go onto the website for the Safe AI for Children Alliance and have a look at that non-negotiables campaign. We've got a template on there for writing to MPs. It's really quick and easy in support of putting better safeguards in place for children. So that's at like a zoomed out level. That's really important. All empowered to take that kind of action. A more sort of in the home type level, and for educators, I would say it does require monitoring of what your child is doing. These sorts of AI companions are advertised widely on like gaming platforms, social media apps, like they just pop up the adverts for them. They're so easy to download. I know myself, I know how busy it is as a parent and how challenging it is to keep an eye on what your child's doing all the time. But that's really important to try and have an oversight of what they're doing. I would also say that it's a sensible idea, that if we're talking about an older child or a young person, and you and your child or young person and their school have decided that they will be using tools like ChatGPT, that they don't do that alone in their bedroom, and that you have open and honest talks about them, about how to use those tools, so that to help them really, really understand that what's on the other side of the screen does not understand them emotionally, does not have their best interest at heart, because it's not real. So those would be things you can implement sort of in the home. And then more generally, again, I know the challenges when everyone's so busy, but take some time to educate yourselves about the risks. Again, excuse me, again, on our website, Safe AI for Children Alliance, we are going to be releasing a guide for parents and educators specifically very soon. There's already a lot of material on there, so you can go ahead and take a look and start to educate yourselves about the main risks. But we are also going to be releasing quite a simple, straightforward guide to what the main risks are and what you can do. So keep an eye out for that.
Brilliant. Well, we'll actually include a reference to the website
Thank you.
on each of the sites where this podcast will run. As you've been talking, thoughts occurred to me that there are young children, and then there are teenagers with hormones running around their body as they reach and grow through puberty. Is there a difference, do you think? Are younger children, because of their age, more vulnerable, or are teenagers with rampant hormones more vulnerable to this manipulation, emotional manipulation and harm? Would you say, is there any research on that?
I'm not aware of any research in terms of what age group is most vulnerable. What I would say is that different age groups are very vulnerable in different ways. So like you've alluded to, teenagers can have big vulnerabilities in certain ways in terms of where they are developmentally. And we've seen that in those very tragic cases, in some of those. But also we're starting to see AI toys for young children.
Yeah.
So that one's just been recalled that was available, like a cuddly bear, that then it transpired said harmful things. Now, there are many risks around giving a little kid a teddy bear that interacts, or is designed to interact with them like a human. There's the aspect where it gives harmful advice, encourages your child to harm themselves or do something dangerous. And there's also, going back to what we've already said, we don't know what it does to children. We don't know yet. We need experts involved in saying whether or not that's a good idea to give something to a child where they don't understand that it's not real, and yet they develop that kind of parasocial relationship, which can be quite addictive in nature. There's the risk they prioritize that over going on a play date with a friend. There's what happens at a wider level when lots of kids start to do that, what happens to like friendship group dynamics and where they're at developmentally in terms of forming new relationships. The more we think about it, the more we realize how many risks are there. So back to your original question, I don't know if I could say which age group is most vulnerable. They're just vulnerable in different ways.
Different ways. Yeah, I get that. Thank you. Before I sum up, I've got some quick fire questions, hopefully yes, no answers. So not many, just 3. Default on safe modes, yes or no, and why? So in other words, the phone and or the software is safe mode on as a default. Age checks, government IDs, on device estimation, or third party attestations. Which of those 3?
I can't give you a yes or no on that. And what I would just need to sort of be open and honest in saying is I don't have the expertise and knowledge around what the in-depth sort of issues are with government ID at the moment. It's something I'd like to explore more, but I don't want to sort of rush into giving an answer that isn't informed enough.
Well, that's I love that answer because, when we acknowledge we are not sure or we don't know, what a wonderful demonstration of personal humility. And that just makes your whole message and campaign more powerful. So thank you that. And the last one, the biggest myth about AI and kids today you'd like to kill in terms of the myth.
I've heard people say it's a big fuss about nothing, sort of, and that it's scaremongering. Like, it really, really isn't. So that would be
No,
the number one thing I need to get across, that these risks are very, very real, and children can be at huge risk of extreme harm from some of these things.
indeed. So my key takeaways, we need enforceable, non-negotiable guardrails. You've talked about them in terms of sexualized images, emotional manipulation to children, and never encourage children to harm themselves. And I would actually say that's also true for adults. Why are we promoting those behaviors? It's really not going to build a better society, is it?
No, absolutely not. Most of the things I've talked about are risks to adults as well. Excuse me. It's just that children are even more vulnerable, and we have a
Of course.
responsibility as adults to protect them. But most of
Indeed.
the risks that they face are to some extent relevant to adults as well.
So those non-negotiable guardrails, very powerful. Second one is safety by design beats moderation after the fact.
Yep.
So you've been very clear about that. And parents, schools, platforms, policymakers, we're all responsible and we all hold a piece of that duty of care. Coordination matters.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
Tara, Steele, thank you so much for a deeply practical and principled conversation. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Me too. I'd love to talk again in the future. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to. So, listeners, that was Tara Steele of the Safe AI for Children Alliance. Please look it up. Click the link on the podcast. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others discover the show. I'm Roger Steare. Join us next time on Chat Rog, where we explore not just what AI can do, but what it should do.